In the dead of winter, February of 1849, just before dawn, a man stepped silently through the fog outside a private hospital on the edge of Baltimore. He carried nothing. And yet, when he walked away, he left behind a girl. She had no name, no papers, no explanation. Her dress was sewn entirely shut, every seam, every buttonhole stitched over by hand in black waxed thread. No zippers, no laces, no fasteners. Her eyes didn't follow movement. Her breath didn't fog in the cold. She made no sound when touched. She didn't speak. She didn't blink. She simply existed. By the end of her first week in the hospital, staff began whispering strange things. Her handwriting, when coaxed perfectly, matched the nurses'. Even their flourishes, their hesitations. One doctor quit on the spot. Another stopped signing his own name. And the last, he sealed his notes in wax, locked her room from the outside, and left only a single chilling sentence behind. She's not imitating us. But who or what was this girl? And what was she doing in a locked ward? No one remembered building. Before we answer that, I'll ask one thing. If you're hearing this wherever you are, drop a comment with your country and the current time. There's something comforting in knowing we're scattered across timelines, all watching the same impossible story unfold. This is the story of the girl science could not explain. Let's begin. The constable's visit was never formally logged. His name isn't recorded anywhere in the registry. All we have is a smeared graphite scrawl in the evening margin of a torn half-page, now kept under wax paper in Ashbury's fragmented archives. The note is brief, delivered female child. Approx 12, silent, no name given, garment stitched, no visible injury, fog dense, return denied. She wasn't dropped at the front portico where all official handovers happened. Instead, she was left at the south servants' gate, where barrels were delivered and coal was offloaded. Later, the stable boy claimed he heard no wagon wheels, only silence. And although boot prints, small ones, could be seen crossing the gravel toward the east, no carriage tracks were ever found in the frost. The girl made no noise as she was lifted onto a linen cart. She did not struggle. She did not tremble. She simply allowed herself to be wheeled inside. Nurse Agnes Kitteridge was the first to touch her. She'd worked at Ashbury through 17 winters and claimed she'd seen everything. But in her unsigned memo to the house matron, she described the girl's condition in words that would echo through hospital rumor for years. Her dress was made of morning crepe cold, dyed a near black shade of grey. Every seam was sewn shut with a single line of waxed black thread. No buttons, no laces, no breaks, no closures. It was as if the garment had been tailored onto her, stitched in place without pause or rest. Her boots too were stitched closed. The soles were rounded in a way that didn't match her gait, suggesting the shoes were not made for her or had been altered. She wore nothing beneath the dress. What skin was visible? Her forearms, her neck was pale and oddly smooth. Despite the January chill, there was no goose flesh. Her body registered warmth to the touch, yet her breath didn't fog on the mirror. Her hair was flaxen, flat trimmed to the shoulder. Even the cut was too clean, as though done with intention and finality. She bore no bruises, no scars, no sign of abuse. But still, something wasn't right. Dr. Elijah Wakefield began intake at precisely 9:10 p.m. He found her upright, seated calmly on the linen cart hands folded in her lap. When he shone his lamp into her eyes, she did not flinch, did not blink, did not track the light. In his nightly report, he wrote, "Subject's pupils stable. No flicker to heat or brightness. She appears to track movement not with her gaze, but with a tilt of her neck. Muteness is not willful, more a total absence of reflex. She was not weighed. The scale had broken the day before and no replacement had yet arrived. No one attempted to undress her, there were no seams to open. Instead, a tailor from the nearby asylum, Franklin Furl, was brought in for assessment. His conclusion: the widow's loop technique, meant to stay closed, no practical method of removal or repair. He managed to extract a single thread from the hem by force. That thread was sealed in wax and placed in the file. Later, someone not named would identify the material as non-commercial, not available anywhere in Maryland at the time. At 10:22 p.m., as lights dimmed in the ward, Nurse Kitteridge made one final entry. The girl had sat still for nearly 90 minutes. Then gently, she raised her right hand to the collar where the seam met just beneath her throat. With thumb and forefinger, she pinched the thread as if preparing to untie something. There was no knot, nothing to undo. After a long pause, she let her hand fall back to her lap, folded, calm, as though she had remembered something she was not meant to finish. The removal of the garment wasn't immediate. It was discussed first quietly, formally in committee. That was protocol at Ashbury Hall whenever a new arrival's origin couldn't be verified. The morning after the girl appeared, Dr. Elijah Wakefield submitted a formal request for disrobement. He cited concerns over restricted movement, impaired hygiene, and noted the possibility of a ritualistic purpose behind the outfit. The request was countersigned by Matron Devlin with one note of caution: preserve seam work where possible. Document garment prior to alteration. At 2:15 p.m., under direct observation, Nurse Agnes Kitteridge began the slow, methodical removal of the dress using surgical shears. What happened next would be described months later as deliberate resistance, not by fabric thickness, but by bond. The thread did not snap like cloth thread should. The waxed loops clung to one another like tree sap, gumming up the shears with each pass. The fabric itself was brittle but reactive, as though softened by skin heat or friction over time. It took nearly an hour, and the girl, she never moved, never twitched, never broke the fixed posture she'd held since the previous night. Her hands remained precisely in place, folded like they had always been there. Once freed from the garment, the girl was placed under observation, and the dress itself laid across a canvas mat in Ward 3's examination room. There it was dissected piece by piece for cataloguing. The fabric was identified as Airari crepe common to morning wear from the late 1830s. Nothing unusual at first glance, but the stitching that drew attention. Nurse Kitteridge noted that the thread loops were inconsistent. Every 5 inches the pattern changed. The tension shifted, the direction reversed without any logical cause. It was not a uniform stitch. It was coded, or hesitant, or both. It wasn't until the hem was fully unfolded that something more deliberate was found. There, hidden deep within the double-folded edge of the lining, was a name. Crude embroidery. Fine brown thread. Uneven. as if sewn by shaking hands in low light. Obscured in part by the wax, but still legible, 5 letters, arched upward, half-inch tall, AWR. The implication was immediate and deeply unsettling. Dr. Elijah Wakefield was summoned. The physician, known for his obsessive documentation and his disdain for improvisation, examined the hem with gloved hands. He requested better light, a magnifier, and only after several long silent minutes did he speak. "That is not my hand," he said. "Nor do I use colored thread." He excused himself without further comment and critically refused to file a statement. The dress was wrapped in muslin preserved and placed into the hospital's storage cellar. It was stored inside the same pine chest that once held fire-damaged documents. A strange choice, but not questioned. And then on January 7th, the dress was quietly removed from inventory. No request, no warning. The hospital's junior clerk, Theodore Smalls, was seen carrying the item to the City Tawse Guild for private appraisal. What prompted this transfer remains unclear, but a note accompanied the chest, written in a hand no one recognized. Thread appears repurposed. Identify original usage. The Guild's report survives 4 pages unsealed. Its conclusion: the waxed thread in the dress most closely resembled binding thread, the type used to sew the spines of account ledgers or record books from decades prior. It was common in administrative volumes before the 1835 reform of clerical procedures. In fact, Ashbury Hall itself phased out this exact material in 1836. So, how did it end up in a garment crafted 13 years later? No patient ledgers are missing from Ashbury's archives between 1835 and 1841. However, several volumes were rebound during renovations in 1848. The original bindings were destroyed. The dress was never returned to hospital records. When Nurse Kitteridge inquired after its whereabouts that spring, she was told the item had been transferred to municipal custody. No transfer form exists. The pine chest was eventually found empty, except for one thing: a single loop of waxed thread, tied into a binder's knot, not a tailor's, and frayed directly in the middle. It was a knot for books, not clothes. At Ashbury, it was not standard practice to provide writing slates to non-verbal patients, especially those without clear cognitive response. Slates were typically used in arithmetic therapy and often broke during episodes of distress. The supply was limited, and yet, on the morning of January 6th, a slate did appear in the girl's lap. It was placed there by Nurse Clara Brenneman, a recent transfer from the widow's infirmary. She had received no direct instruction. No doctor had ordered it. No note exists in the record authorizing the gesture. She simply walked into the girl's room and placed it. No one stopped her. No one asked why, and the girl did not look away. Nurse Clara Brenneman later described the act as impulsive. In her written memorandum, she claimed the girl's hands had seemed prepared, as though they already knew how to hold a slate. Not with curiosity, not with hesitation, but with expectation. The girl accepted it without pause. The chalk offered separately was taken with her left hand. What followed was neither erratic scribbling nor the trembling loops often seen in nonverbal patients attempting self-expression. There were no faltering strokes, no clumsy efforts at meaning. The child drew one word slowly, precisely, without correction. cursive, full script, no breaks. Wakefield, the capital W, was unmistakable. A wide opening loop, a sharp serif, and the unmistakable upward curl of the final stroke, an eccentricity, long noted in Dr. Elijah Wakefield's own signature. The match was not just close, it was exact, down to the pressure, down to the quiet arc of the tail. But the strange part, the chalk lines were so faint, they seemed to rest on the slate rather than pressed into it, as if laid there by memory, not force. When Dr. Wakefield was summoned to review the writing, he stood in silence for 30 full seconds. Then, without comment, he requested the slate be set aside for later study. He did not acknowledge the handwriting. He did not take the slate into his possession. But something shifted. In the records, it is noted that within the following week, Dr. Wakefield ceased signing his name in cursive. From that point forward, his documentation appeared only in block lettering. 2 days later, Matron Devlin issued an internal memo to the hospital's administrative board. The subject, cognitive mimicry. She warned of the risk of residents subconsciously reproducing behaviors witnessed during staff routines, especially handwriting speech patterns and mirror actions. In it, she recommended a quiet shift in protocol. All written documentation should be completed outside of patient rooms. Verbal instructions should be replaced wherever possible by non-verbal cues. Writing slates should be withdrawn from all wards. Mirrors were removed from 2 observation chambers. A proposal to blindfold patients during dictation sessions was drafted. It was never formally enacted, but the suggestion alone marked a turning point. The original slate bearing the word Wakefield was placed in a locked cabinet beneath the infirmary's main desk. It would not remain there long. 3 days later, Nurse Brenneman went to retrieve the slate for scheduled review by the hospital's clerical examiner. But it was gone. The lock showed no signs of tampering, no damage, no scratch. Inside the drawer were 2 replacement slates, unused, unmarked, stacked neatly where the original had been. The attending night nurse, Harlan Pierce, submitted a signed statement declaring he had not opened the cabinet nor seen anyone else do so. He had, by his own account, no reason to inspect it. But he noted something strange without being asked. The lower right drawer, stiff and jammed for years, now slid open without resistance. The original slate has never been recovered. Dr. Wakefield made no mention of it again. But in the intake log for January 12th, during a routine review of the girl's file, he recorded the following: patient remains silent, exhibits no hostility, slate withdrawn, no further writing encouraged, observation left-handed, knows her letters possibly ours. That final phrase, possibly ours, was crossed out, but the graphite shadow remains beneath the line. It was the only time in any Ashbury record that Dr. Wakefield referred to the girl using the possessive. Now, let's talk about the room. Architectural records for Ashbury Hall, last revised in 1846 after the East Wing's expansion, describe each patient room in precise dimensions. Rooms 1 through 5, aligned along the main corridor, face west and receive afternoon light. All are equipped with transoms floor vents and circulation from the central coal boiler beneath the basement stairs. But room 6 is different. Room 6 faces north. Its outer wall is nearly 10 inches thicker than any other in the ward, reinforced to brace the old foundation. It is the only patient chamber in the East Wing without a functioning vent. It receives no forced air, no chimney drawer, no window draft. This is acknowledged without concern in the hospital's maintenance logs. Labeled simply low circulation, acceptable for short-term hold. Orderlies had occasionally noted the room's stillness, even its odd warmth, but no complaints had ever been filed. No investigations launched. That is until the second week of January 1849. Over the span of 5 consecutive days, each morning at first light, just as the night staff transitioned, something new was found beneath room 6's heavy oak door. A thin accumulation of black soot, always dry, always fine, never thick. It didn't smear like hearth ash, nor did it carry the weight of chimney residue. When lifted with a blade or blotter paper, it came away cleanly. Nurse Pierce, who handled 2 of the cleanings, described the substance in his own hand as fine black powder, not yet spent, fallen, not drawn. Room 6 had no fire. The girl had no candles, no implements, no books, no writing tools, no matches, not even fabric beyond her bedding. The only item in the room besides the cot and chamber pot was herself. And still the soot appeared just under the threshold, just enough to mark presence, or absence, or perhaps intent. The walls of room 6 had been inspected only a few months prior in October, replastered in lime. The structure was sound, no flue ran behind it, and unlike rooms 1 through 3, there was no narrow viewing slit in the northern wall, just unbroken stone. At first the soot was dismissed. A careless orderly, perhaps superstitious, maybe distracted, might have carried the residue from the boiler room. That was the assumption. A directive was issued on January 10th. Staff were to clean their boots before entering the east wing. The soot returned the next morning. By the 12th, Dr. Wakefield ordered the patient temporarily removed for linen change and a closer inspection of room 6. The girl was placed in a corridor chair for just under 9 minutes. Nurse Kittredge supervised her quietly. 2 orderlies entered with a lantern, a broom, and a broad-handled scraper. Their written account filed with the matron's log described walls and floorboards as intact, dry clean, and uncharred. The grate, long sealed, showed no trace of use, no staining, no debris, but one detail stood out. On the interior face of the oak door along the base, just above the floor, there were faint abrasions, half-circular, shallow, as if rubbed, not carved, not struck, rubbed from within. The marks were invisible under lantern light, but when Nurse Kittredge passed a chalk cloth across the threshold, the curvature emerged delicate and repeating. They covered only one side of the door's width. When the girl was returned to the room, she gave no visible response, no recognition of the change. She sat with folded hands, upright, silent. But as the orderlies turned to leave, Nurse Kittredge saw her eyes shift not toward them, but downward, to the floor, to the spot where the soot had always gathered. That evening, Matron Devlin offered a suggestion. The threshold was lined with a folded gauze sheet weighted gently at the corners. The door was locked. No one was permitted inside. By morning, the gauze was gone. The weights remained. There was no soot. The next morning, the same. But on the third morning, pressed into the oak at the base of the door, was a single marking. A dark crow sketched in graphite, sharpened to a graceful curve. Beneath the cot, a fragment of pencil lead was found. No new pencils had been issued that week. At Ashbury Hall, the process of recording physician-patient interaction was not merely standard, it was required by contract. Since the Medical Oversight Revision of 1843, every attending doctor had been obligated to submit end-of-day logs notes on behavior response to stimuli length of session and any deviation from previous patterns. Each report was sealed, signed and filed into the central intake ledger kept locked in the matron's office. With the girl in room 6, this protocol was observed exactly for 4 days. Each attending physician submitted a sealed envelope bearing their name, time of observation, and no summary diagnosis. The entries were collected, stamped, and stored. The envelopes remain intact today in Ashbury's archival volume 19A. Observations 1 through 4, still sealed, still unread. Then came session 5, Sunday, January 14th. The assignment that morning fell to Dr. Alton S. Baer, a visiting examiner from Providence. He had arrived the evening prior. His name was unfamiliar. His presence irregular. Dr. Baer was not summoned by committee. He was not on staff. His name appeared in the guest ledger with only a single notation: Observer Psychiatry, 1 day only. While his credentials were valid, most of Ashbury's staff had never heard of him. He had formerly practiced at the Rhode Island Retreat for the Nervous and Unnerved, but had left that institution under unclear terms in 1847. His assignment to Room 6 had not passed through Dr. Wakefield, nor had Matron Devlin signed off. According to the administrator's record, his placement came by external recommendation, though no such letter survives. At 9:05 a.m., Dr. Baer entered room 6. He remained inside for 28 minutes. Nurse Kittredge, seated outside with the time ledger, heard nothing. No raised voices, no pacing, no movement of furniture. At 9:33 a.m., Dr. Baer exited the chamber. He offered no remarks save this: colder than expected. He declined refreshment. He did not speak again. By protocol, his written observation was due in the administrator's inbox by noon. It never arrived. When prompted, Dr. Baer told the clerk that nothing applicable had been recorded. He left Ashbury that evening on foot. The carriage that had delivered him did not return. He declined escort. He walked north. He was not seen again. The January 14th logbook had reserved a space for his entry. Observation 5 Baer. The line remains visible in scanned archives. But the physical page was removed. Between January 16th and 18th, the sheet was cut from the volume. A new folio was stitched in. In the margin of the replacement page, written in unfamiliar script, is a short note: reassigned. Entry removed at discretion of oversight. No initials accompany it. Ashbury's logs are rarely altered. Of the 317 patient reports filed between 1843 and 1851, only 4 show signs of removal. This observation 5 is the only missing entry connected to a physician who never returned. In 1872, during the rebinding of Ashbury's records, a scrap of paper was discovered between folios 112 and 113, yellowed, softened by time. It bore 5 faint words in graphite. She already knew the questions. It was unsigned. No one on staff recalled writing it. But the paper itself, the texture, the grain, matched the physician's stationery issued during 1849. Elsewhere, quiet changes continued. On the north wall of the infirmary's second floor sat a small drawer rarely used. It housed gauze twine and lamp flints. The drawer had not been opened since October. The key was kept in Matron Devlin's ledger desk, signed out only during quarterly inventory. Nurse Elsie Dandridge, who occupied the winter night post, had no cause to check the drawer until January 16th. While gathering tinctures, she noticed the drawer slightly ajar, an inch at most, enough to reveal that the gauze inside was missing, and in its place, the corner of a folded document. The light was poor. She did not investigate further. She assumed it had been accessed during Sunday's emergency kit inspection and left open by mistake. She shut it. The following day, the drawer was open again. This time, wider. No one had signed for the key. The lock had not been tampered with. The mechanism remained firm. Inside, no medical supplies were found. Instead, 7 sheets of parchment arranged in 2 neat stacks, a single wooden stylus placed atop. None of the documents bore an official seal, but each page was written in a different hand. The first matched Dr. Wakefield's script, dated January 10th. The contents were not in the administrator's records. It described the girl's silence, a failed attempt at stimulation using a brass mirror, and ended with the chilling line. She did not follow the reflection. She followed the shadow of my hand. The second page was a private note by Nurse Brenneman, not intended for archive. It referenced the girl's grip strength, stronger, she noted, than any female patient currently held in the ward or convalescent wing. One page bore only the word bear and a poetic phrase, afternoon light through gauze. It was unsigned. Below, in smaller print, she breathes as if remembering how. The administrator was alerted. The drawer was sealed. The documents transcribed. A new inventory form was added to the infirmary log in red ink. The key was returned to its place. No inquiry was launched. No explanation offered. But the next morning, January 18th, the drawer was open again. The resemblance was confirmed. When presented with the drawing, Dr. Crane reportedly went pale. It was Fenwick. Not an approximation, not a childish caricature, it was him, drawn with a familiarity that should have been impossible. The droop of the right eye, the bend of his collar, even the shallow split in his lower lip, from coughing, all preserved in lines of chalk no wider than a thread. There was no way the girl had ever seen his face. And yet, she'd rendered it. Wakefield ordered the slate photographed and locked in storage. No explanation was offered. No formal notation made. But that morning, one order was issued in handwriting. Only Wakefield used slate rotation for room 6 double daily. Do not display previous entries. By the 25th, her slate had been wiped 7 times. Each cleaning left faint residue beneath the newest markings. Sometimes, despite the nurse's best effort, older impressions bled through spirals. Beneath spirals, faces beneath forms. On the evening of the 26th, a low sound was heard in the corridor. Not a voice, not speech. More like breath over glass. Nurse Marley, passing with the linen cart, paused beside room 6. The window was fogged from within. In the center, traced in slow arcs, was a circle broken by 2 diagonal slashes. She stepped back. The girl was asleep, slate untouched. The mark disappeared as the fog cooled. That same night, Maintenance reported an electrical irregularity in the infirmary's west hallway, flickering in 3 gas sconces, 32 seconds each, exactly timed. No mechanical cause found. At 3:17 a.m., orderly Thomas Black left his station to investigate. He never returned. His body was discovered near the North Infirmary wall, the same wall revised per D.C. Matt in 1831. His pulse was strong, breathing shallow. No wound, no trauma, but his eyes remained fixed open, unmoving even after sedation. His pupils tracked no light. He did not respond to voice. He could not swallow. As of the final record in 1907, he had not spoken again. At first, there was no note, just a thin line under the drawing. But at 9 a.m., when the nurse did a second round of checks, a name appeared on the tablet: Michael A. Fenwick. The handwriting matched the girl's earlier notes, clumsy left-handed, carefully etched into stone. No paper had been left in the room. No patient name tag was posted on the door. Nurse Brannaman, bewildered, went out into the hallway to check the name on the patient's chart. And sure enough, Michael A. Fenwick was the right name. She carefully took the tablet to Dr. Wakefield. He didn't file it as he usually did. Instead, Wakefield asked that it be kept in a locked drawer under the medication log in the pharmacy, a place for what were called unusual documents. And to this day, the tablet is still there. That afternoon, the devil administrator called a small meeting of the nursing staff to try to come up with a plausible explanation. Some thought the girl had overheard someone's name in the hallway. Some thought a nurse had let it slip at the door, but no one admitted to doing so. Nurse Dandridge, however, filed an internal memo with a different perspective. She wrote, "What makes me shudder is not that she drew him, but that she drew him so coldly, right? No blush, no tenderness. The face of a dying man. But the eyes were wrong. They were wide open." Fenwick's only admission record included a photograph taken when he arrived at the hospital. A thin man, bald with a thin mustache. Compare the photograph to the drawing. The ears, the shoulders, the lopsided collar all match. But there was one strange difference. Fenwick's mouth was closed in the photo. No one had ever taught her how to use a camera. No one had ever seen the girl exposed to a camera. 2 days after the drawing appeared, a wax-sealed envelope arrived at the east gate of Ashbury. The sender was anonymous. The envelope bore only a handwritten note to the person she called. Inside was a linen handkerchief embroidered with the initials MF and stained at one corner. Wrapped in the cloth was an old newspaper clipping, torn but not cut from a Providence newspaper, dated December 3rd, 1848. The headline read, "Former teacher moves to Baltimore sanitarium." The article was brief, mentioning only that Mr. Fenwick had taught at a boarding school for girls in Rhode Island and had left after a strange epiphany. No further details were given. The handkerchief was unsigned. The fabric did not match any in the hospital. The courier left no information. The slate was still there. The chalk on her cheek faded as if someone had touched it. No one could prove that she had ever known Fenwick. And strangely enough, that was the last person she ever drew. She never drew anyone after that. At the back of the west wing of Ashbury, almost completely hidden in shadow, was the central crematorium. It was used primarily for burning dirty medical gauze, broken bottles, or private letters that couldn't be saved. The staff usually collected everything at dusk and finished burning before dawn. Each burn was recorded in a logbook in a rusty iron safe next to the door. On the morning of January 26th, the entry was normal. Rags of linen bandages, spoiled syrup, 2 damaged folders. Nothing unusual. No mention of architectural documents. But the furnace operator Cornelius Pratt noticed something harder than usual stuck in the grate. The ash had not yet completely settled. Amid the pile of half-burned cloth, a scorched piece of parchment had rolled up instead of crumbling. He picked it up with tongs, let it cool, and then realized the ink was still clear. It was an engineering drawing. Only about a quarter of it was intact, but enough to read the title, Additional Plans for Ashbury Hall, East Block Draft 3B, April 1844. In the corner was a faint stamp, DCM. Pratt immediately handed the scrap of paper to the devil manager. She asked to check the archives for a match. There was none. The most recent architectural document in the East Block's official records was dated January 1844. No one knew of any April versions. But the strange thing was not the date. Despite the scorching, the drawing clearly showed a small rectangular space marked Room 6A right next to the girls' room. On the official blueprints, there was no room there. The walls were listed as load-bearing thick stone with no entrances or voids. Yet, the drawings gave detailed dimensions. Height 6 feet 2 inches. Width 3 feet 9 inches. No depth. And most striking, there was a door, an entrance that did not exist in reality. Wakefield was summoned to examine the drawing. He observed it quietly, saying nothing. Then he asked to borrow the manager's master key, which he used to check the base of walls and pipes without calling the engineering team. Wakefield went down the east corridor himself. The maintenance logs recorded that he was there for 11 minutes. When he returned, he said nothing. He wrote no report. He simply returned the key. The burned sketch had been locked in a medical cabinet used to store sensitive documents for special cases. That evening, Dr. Wakefield added a brief note to the girl's file. Proximity to unbuilt space has no clinical relevance. 2 days later, the incinerator log was updated. A page had been removed and replaced. But the handwriting was not Dr. Pratt's. When questioned by Guardian Devil, Pratt claimed that he had not made the original entry, nor had he burned any files. He had simply remembered the drawing. The initials DCM. It was only later that it was remembered those letters matched the notation that had appeared in the margin of the 1831 building plan. The same note that had been cited when mentioning the strange wall 2 weeks earlier. When the East Wing was re-examined in 1851 due to concerns about rat infestation, the masons measured the area around Room 6. On the northeast wall, 2 blocks showed unusual subsidence. A faint, unplastered seam ran along the wall, hidden behind a layer of plaster. This section of stone was much newer than the rest of the corridor. There was no cavity behind it. But when lightly tapped with the handle of a hammer, the echo was not the usual solid thump of solid stone, but a thin, strange ringing. Only once. Then, silence. For the next 4 days, the girl in room 6 remained completely unresponsive. No chalk, no signs, no repeated gestures. Before that, she had left a few marks discreet and unstructured on the slate. Every day, sketches, reverse symbols assumed handwriting. All of it seemed copied from memory, not observation. But from the morning of January 29, all activities suddenly stopped. Her hands were folded in her lap, her eyes staring straight ahead, but lifeless, barely blinking. She ate when given food but did not respond to any commands. No fever, no change in heart rate, no signs of mental withdrawal. According to Nurse Dandridge, she was not asleep, not awake, just paused. Dr. Wakefield thought this was a sign of simulation exhaustion. He wrote briefly in his diary, "Subject has a possible decrease in surface responses due to cognitive overload." A clean slate was placed by the bed. For 3 days, there was no sign. But by the morning of February 2nd, the slate was covered with writing. Not drawings or symbols, just lines. Short, irregularly spaced, no titles, no dates. At first glance, the writing looked like a grammar exercise for the developmentally disabled, simple subject-predicate phrases. But on closer inspection, the content was creepy. Each line described a person, not a name but a specific situation. The nurse who ate alone on the stairs had not told her mother about the baby. The man who limped wrote with his left hand but taught with his right. He forgot this. The so-called guardian wiped tears on his apron before entering. None of these sentences had ever been spoken. None of them were in the personnel file. But when compared discreetly with the behavior of the staff, they all matched. The nurse who ate on the stairs was said to be Miss L. Hyraftoft, who, when questioned, denied it at once but resigned just a week later. Dr. Wakefield made no record of the entries. Instead, he ordered the board to be wiped clean and replaced with a new one. But by nightfall, the new board had 6 more lines, still in the same style, still chillingly clear. One line read, "The man in black who said nothing smelled of turpentine and knew who used the hidden drawer." That week, no one in black had been listed in the guest book. The only person in a black coat during that time was the city council's drug inspector, Mr. Josas Bell. He had only stopped by the health department on January 28th to inspect the bottles. No one had mentioned the drawer. The girl's room was across the hall, locked during the inspection. But the last line on the morning of February 3rd was truly terrifying. Written large in the middle of the board, "The person who reads my lines is forgetting what he once knew." Below in smaller print, "He will not write after this." That day, Dr. Wakefield kept no diary. The next morning, Nurse Kitaj found the February 3rd note still on his desk, unsigned, half-written, the ink dry in mid-sentence. The last line read, "Patient knows private matters. Risk, unfinished sentence." The note was not saved. In the next report, dated February 5th, Wakefield continued to write in his diary, but in stiff, cold capital letters like a machine. She never imitated the sound, not once. That evening, the east wing of Ashbury Hall was sealed off by order of Acting Director Elwyn Surrett. The decision was not made public, but it was known internally by the staff that it stemmed from a series of anomalies. Files were being tampered with, unscheduled mail was being sent, and documents that had been stricken from service suddenly reappeared as if they had never been. The official announcement referred to a 3-day structural inspection combined with a patient safety assessment, the pretext being complaints about uneven airflow and ventilation system failures. But inside the orders were clear: all staff were to remain in their assigned areas with absolutely no outside contact except to the medical area. The 12 medical staff remained inside the locked hallway. 7 patients were isolated in rooms 2 through 7. Room 6, still reserved for the unknown girl, was constantly monitored by Nurse Lemieux Clark, one of the few male nurses allowed to work nights on the ward. At 2:40 a.m. on the second day of the quarantine, a soft bell rang from the hallway. No one pulled the bell cord. The bell cord, last replaced in 1846, had long since been fully used and could sometimes be affected by temperature changes. But for whatever reason, Nurse Abigail Fenn came down the stairs from the upper floor of the infirmary to check on her. She never returned. At 3:05 a.m., her absence was officially recorded in the log. Nurse Clark was sent to replace her. He found her collapsed in front of the door to room 6, her body hunched over arms, crossed over her chest legs, tucked under her as if she had been set up. There was no sign of trauma, no bruises, nothing to suggest she had fallen or had a seizure. Her pulse was still beating, albeit weakly. But the strange thing was that her mouth was pressed tightly shut, unable to open. When Dr. Wakefield arrived on the scene 12 minutes later and attempted to revive her, he discovered the obstruction in her throat. Pieces of soft material, as if stuffed between her teeth, were pressed deep into her throat. Removing them required 2 specialized tools. It was wet, pulp, crumbled paper soaked in dark ink pressed into a thick mass. The ink was iron gallic. The paper bore no identifying marks or markings, but appeared to be old archival paper. 3 fragments retained writing faint upside down as if printed long ago and now almost faded. One fragment contained only half a name, L. Another contained a partial date, Feb 2, 1849. Nurse Fenn had been unconscious for 9 hours. When she woke up, she remembered nothing. No pain, no struggle. Her last memory was of walking down the stairs, hearing the slate scrape against the floor in room 6. And then, feeling like I was being recorded, she said. Room 6 was undisturbed. She was still sitting upright in bed. Her hands were covered in black ink up to her wrists. She hadn't been issued any ink since January 17th. Under the bed, a slate was found. On it, the phrase, "He did not know his name," was written 6 times over. There was no sign of the girl correcting her mistakes. Each line was identical, from the slant to the spacing. When Nurse Clark compared the writing to the previous sample, he noticed something strange. The slant now matched his own handwriting. That morning, Dr. Wakefield immediately recommended that Nurse Fenn be transferred to the sanatorium. She was sent without any psychological evaluation. The recovered papers were sealed in an unmarked envelope and placed in a safe in the director's office, along with the slate and a single leather-bound book found lying on the office floor. The book, originally thought to be a lost financial ledger from 1842, was in fact completely empty inside. There were no pages, only the cover. But right on the inside edge of the cover, hidden under the worn leather, was a thin, shallow line as if engraved with a steel pen. Leave nothing unwritten. Let nothing be unwritten. The writing began to reappear sometime between midnight and early the next morning. No chalk had been issued the day before. No slate to write on. After the strange quarantine, Ashbury instituted a strict policy banning all East Wing patients from unsupervised access to writing instruments. She had been given none. But on the morning of February 7th, Nurse Clark found her slate propped up at the foot of her bed. On it, 6 lines of writing were clearly visible in white chalk. The writing was straight, tight, and compact, none of the curving characteristics of normal English handwriting. The symbols on the tablet were unlike anything taught in the hospital. They were something like old German Gothic, mixed with ecclesiastical script, but not quite either. The girl remained seated on her iron bed, her hands clasped together, showing no sign of confusion or attempt to identify herself as the writer. Not a movement, not a glance at the tablet. The tablet was quickly passed to Dr. Wakefield, who quickly recognized a series of characters that had disappeared from modern Latin "edeo," and a strange symbol that looked like an upside-down T with a bar underneath. Although he was fluent in both French and Latin, he was unable to decipher it. At first, the staff suspected it was some sort of pseudo-cipher, perhaps borrowed from the scraps of literature the girl had encountered. The tablet was kept in the infirmary for analysis, but after 2 days, no reliable meaning had been found. The case might have been forgotten had it not been for the unexpected return of Dr. Saren Minninger on the morning of February 9th. He had left Ashbury on January 20 after a series of experiments with the symmetrical symbol. Minninger gave no specific reason for his return, saying only that the patterns had become clearer. When shown the tablet, he remained silent for nearly 15 minutes. Then he slowly confirmed it was a form of Old Eastern Danish, which had survived only in a few late 18th century religious manuscripts and had almost completely disappeared after 1735. But what worried him was not just the rarity of the language, but the form in which it was written. This was not a theological text, it was a ritual one, a type of memory training text used in small seminaries along the Baltic coast, especially in the Sebi region, where there had been a brief educational movement from 1700 to 1720. The girl wrote in et crypt, a contraction in which the endings of words were replaced by symbols, not sounds. This was a technique taught only in small monasteries and had disappeared before mass education began in Denmark. Wakefield then asked, how could a child born and raised in America with little travel have mastered a form of language that had been extinct on paper and had not been taught anywhere for more than a century? Meininger did not offer an explanation. He simply recommended that the girl not be exposed to any further language text or symbols. She wasn't translating. He said she was reproducing, and what she was reproducing, he worried, might not have originated with her. That night, while transferring the manuscript to paper, Nurse Dandridge noticed something strange in the last line. Among the ancient characters, there was a single English word, completely isolated, underlined twice: filant. Meininger translated it simply as finished or more darkly finished. When asked whether this was the end of a sentence or of something larger, Meininger simply replied, in ancient syntax, the word never came at the end. It was always placed in the middle, the implication being that something was still unfinished at both ends. The tablet was locked in storage. For 3 days, nothing happened. But on the 4th day, a new inscription appeared, not on a blackboard this time, but in a faint scrawl on the wall just above the girl's iron bed. It was the same old Danish, the same typical layout, but this time, the 3 words were centered. Yagva, for I have been, The Reverend Jonah Thacker of St. Matthew's Church had been a regular visitor to Ashbury since 1841, mainly to perform last rites for the unaccompanied and to read scripture. He rarely entered the east wing of the hospital and rarely spoke to the medical staff. His notes were brief, his sermons were all under 10 minutes, his language dry and limited to theological debate. But that changed completely on February 14th. In the visitor's log that day in the left margin was a scrawled urgent note. Individual consultation required. Assessment without delay. She must be transferred. The note clearly referred to the patient in room 6. There was no evidence that Father Thacker had ever spoken to the girl or even entered her room. According to the shift log and the Eucharistic book, he had never mentioned her in any of the rituals. Yet, that morning, without invitation, he had personally requested to see her alone. Not to perform a service, but to talk. Dr. Wakefield, though cautious, agreed. In his log, he wrote a single sentence: "Let the people of faith observe. Perhaps faith will name what science cannot." No nurses were present in the room during the entire meeting. However, Nurse Abigail Finn was assigned to stand guard at the door and carefully recorded the time of the conversation. At exactly 10:17 a.m., a man entered room 6. For precisely 7 minutes, no sound except the soft creak of a chair sliding away from the wall disturbed the silence. No prayers were recited, no whispers, no calls for help. Then, at 10:24 a.m., the door slowly opened. The visitor emerged with his shoulders drawn inward and his lips parted in mid-sentence, as if he had tried but failed to complete his words. He never signed out, nor did he reclaim his coat from the anteroom. Instead, he walked purposefully down the corridor, past the infirmary, and out the northern staff exit. By the time Nurse Fenn returned to log the hour at the desk, he had vanished beyond the rusted iron gate, into the shadowed street, never to be seen again at Ashbury. On February 16th, the hospital received a handwritten letter bearing no salutation. Only one single sentence, followed by his signature: "There are eyes that know the name of silence. Reverend Jonathan." No further explanation was provided. That very day, the Reverend tendered his resignation from all institutional chaplaincies. Meanwhile, inside room 6, the girl remained unmoving. Nurse Fenn observed that her posture and expression were unchanged. Yet later, when the chair was returned to its usual corner, staff discovered a small folded tract resting upon it. The paper carried a hand-copied passage from the Gospel of Mark, the passage from chapter 5 recounting the healing of the man possessed by legion. In faded ink at its margin, someone had underlined a single verse, a plea, almost pleading, that he would not send them away from the country. The tract was then filed under miscellaneous observations in the patient's record, its origin still unexplained. Later that week, as dusk settled, a faintly scrawled note appeared along the upper frame of room 6's door, visible only when the light struck at just the right angle. 3 smudged but legible words read, "He knew early." Then, at precisely 6:35 p.m., on the evening of February 19th, Dr. Edwin Howrin, the final physician assigned to the patient in room 6, submitted his resignation. It was abrupt and unannounced. No formal departure notice was given, and no verbal farewell was made to the administration or the matron. The following morning, Nurse Clara Brennaman found a neatly placed letter atop the main desk in the infirmary parlor. It was weighed down by a medical index dated the previous week. The envelope bore no name, only a solitary drop of crimson wax, its seal impressed by the blunt end of a stylus, irregular, flattened, and subtly concave. Inside, on a small folded sheet of vellum, no larger than a communion tract, were 3 brief lines. She didn't learn from us. We learned from her, and now we don't know who we are. No other document accompanied the letter. That day's observation register, which should have contained Dr. Howren's case notes, remained blank. The last entry, dated 2 days earlier, lacked even a signature. When Nurse Dandridge sought to retrieve Howren's file from his quarters, she found his cabinet drawers completely empty. His coat boots and personal effects had vanished, and his name was crudely struck from the door placard with a single charcoal line. Yet, the most baffling remnant lay at the base of his vacated bedpost. Matron Devil discovered an opened patient ledger, Volume C, 1849 admissions. The page had been creased once and then folded back to reveal a partial list of weekly rotations. The girl's entry, indexed only as unnamed female East Hall Room 6, was annotated in unfamiliar ink. In the margin, a single word appeared: returned. It read simply, returned. Not discharged, not deceased, but returned. Returned, but returned to where or to whom remained an unsolvable enigma. Efforts to trace Dr. Howren led nowhere. He was absent from Baltimore lodging houses, and his name did not appear on any outgoing rail manifests. Letters sent to his family in Charles County were returned unopened. A small footnote in the Baltimore Evening Transcript, dated March 1st, noted that his medical license was suspended indefinitely due to his failure to appear for board review. The transcript and the folded vellum were eventually sealed away in Ashbury's restricted records drawer among a collection of irregular correspondences and unexplained materials that had quietly accumulated since the girl's arrival. By month's end, that drawer held 9 undocumented items: a wax seal impression, pressed into gauze, a handwriting sample with no identifiable source, and even a half-burned page from Volume A of the 1835 intake journal. Bearing only a fragmentary phrase, "one who never entered yet," left a trace on the ledger. For the remainder of that week, the girl remained unresponsive. She did not speak, nor did she write further. She ate, when prompted, slept at scheduled intervals, and gave no hint of acknowledging Dr. Howren's mysterious departure. Then, on the morning of February 24th, a new discovery was made by the staff nurse on duty. A faint discoloration was visible on the inside of the slate drawer beneath the girl's cot. When the drawer was pulled open, its underside revealed 3 distinct lines, etched deep enough with the tip of a needle to score the surface, yet not breaking through. No explanation was offered, no name was attached, no question asked. It was as if someone or something had whispered in that space. He asked no questions. He left no name. He remembered too much. No one signed the engraving. Howren's resignation was accepted in absentia. No successor was appointed. 33 years after the anonymous girl was last seen at Ashbury Hall, a renovation campaign was approved by the state of Maryland. The project was part of a broader effort to modernize aging facilities across the state, including replacing slate roofs, widening hallways, and installing new electrical systems. In April 1882, a construction crew led by foreman Ezra Mullen was tasked with removing an interior wall in the east wing of the original building, specifically the wall adjacent to Room 6, a room that had been called by that name for decades. In Mullen's summary report, he noted that the wall was unusually thick, double-walled in some places, and completely devoid of pipes, vents, or electrical wiring. When the plaster was stripped away and the supporting beams were removed, what emerged was not the back of another room as it should have been, but a solid block of stone tightly built, plastered, and covered with a wooden lattice. No doors, no windows, no openings. It wasn't a partition. It was the end of something. In keeping with archival protocol, a request was made to the State Architectural Archives for all drawings and floor plans relating to the original structure of Ashbury Hall, especially the east wing alterations made before 1850. What they got back was even more confusing. A brittle discolored roll of green paper was returned, labeled Ashbury Provisional Plan of East Wing 1839. The water-smeared drawing, the brown ink, and the faint signature of architect Daniel C. Matt in the lower left corner matched the 3 letters DCM that had appeared in internal documents decades before. But on this drawing room, 6 did not exist. There was no square bearing that number. Instead, a small slot was marked in faded cursive. Exit, fire only, sealed. Marginal notes made it clear this was a planned exit, accessible only from the outside via a trapdoor and metal ladder, which were never installed. The space was destined to be empty, sealed, unlit, unused, and yet, for more than 30 years, it had been called Room 6. Patient records, field tests, and dozens of staff testimonies confirmed that the room existed. It had a bed, a light drawers, and a permanent observation window. A room that had clearly been used and that no one had ever drawn. On April 19, 1882, while removing layers of stone from the old corridor wall, a workman named Harold Kemp discovered a crumbling mortar joint, revealing a hollow space about 6 inches deep, cool dry. When he widened it, he could fit a gloved hand inside. There was no air. There was only silence. In the niche, wrapped tightly in rotting medical gauze, was a piece of waxed card, yellowed and curled at the edges. At first, it looked completely empty. But when held up to the afternoon sun, an embossed mark gradually emerged, faintly visible, only at an angle. 3 uninked characters A1. The number did not match any room designation that had existed at Ashbury, nor did it match a hallway code floor plan or storage room number. Check all records from time to time, no numbering sequence ending in A1. A Johns Hopkins analysis in 1883 found traces of oxidized iron ink on the gauze illiterate, as if something had been written and then erased. 2 days later, the niche was sealed. The hallway was widened. Room 6 was converted into a linen closet. No official record of the discovery. But in Mullen's field notebook, now housed at the Baltimore Historical Society, a penciled note was written next to the date of discovery. The room fits the girl, but the walls do not match any of the plans. He did not sign. There were no discharge papers. There were no burial records. Room number 6 was turned into storage before anyone could explain what it had actually been. Her name was never recorded on the census. Her handwriting appeared in 7 different employee books, but no one had ever seen her hold a pen. Not really. Some stories are meant to be erased. This one almost got buried. But now, if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe to Sleepy History Tales. And if you're still awake, leave a comment with your country and time period. Because even after all these years, and even though we're halfway around the world, it's strange and comforting to know that there are still people reading things that should never have been written.